storytellers and readers. Welcome to another episode of I'll Read That, the show where your stories get heard. Whether you're an unpublished author, a self published independent, or just someone with a tale to tell, this is your space to shine. In each of these episodes, I'll be reading your story submitted out loud, giving it a voice, a platform, and most importantly, a chance to grow. You'll get feedback from fellow writers, readers, and creatives to help you sharpen your craft and take your storytelling to the next level. So, if you've been waiting for someone to read your story, I think you found your place. Please submit your story, get heard, and let's grow together. Don't forget, like, comment, and subscribe. And if you got something worth sharing, well, you already know. So we are back in Thassodar Jax, Galactic Ranger by David Jace, Chapter 17. Species Log, Human Jax Earth, 21011. It is of an amusing and dismal note that human legends contain accounts from the humanity's perspective of criminal acts on Earth by aliens, called the Greek myths. They recount the stories and atrocities that were enacted by the fugitive family from the planet Olympus. For those not familiar with the criminal history, their leader, Zeus, and his group of criminals, sentenced to galactic prison, hijacked the transport ship and landed on Earth a few thousand solar revolutions ago. On Earth, in a region called Greece, they set up base on a mountain and tried to rule the humans, who saw them and their unearthly abilities and advanced technology as gods. For the humans were in the early Iron Age of development, with rudimentary metalworking, sculptures, and agriculture, but no understanding of electrical applications or the physical laws as yet. Using the technology stolen or salvaged from the ship, they demonstrated powers the humans could only attribute to magic, and thus a religion was born. Even the battle between the Olympians and the Galactic. Even a battle between the Olympians and the Galactic Rangers that were escorting them to prison is recorded. The Rangers are described as Titans, but were sadly defeated. These legends were later used as damning evidence in their trial for the crimes against a subspace species. That was when the Galactic Rangers what that was when a Galactic Ranger was installed as a permanent position on Earth, so that the humans would not be abused by another species again. Hermes glanced out the window of the shuttle as Lomax landed in the backyard of a remote house. Nothing around but trees along a quiet road. Hermes, recon! He nodded and went out the port. The whine of the engines deepened as he slipped into speed. He knew that he had just become a blue to the others in the shuttle. They were like scenery to him. He loped across the yard to the house. The garage door was open. He raced in, casually taking stock as he went. Blue Corvette, key rack on the wall, holding one set. Space for more vehicles. Dirt tracks where the tires of other vehicles had come and gone. One four-wheeled, one two-wheeled. He found the interior door and burst through it. The splinters from the broken lock floated in the air on their way to scatter across the hall. He was already beyond them. He peeked in the windows as he went down the hall. The third door held his old cellmate Grote. He was cuffed to the wall except for two free hands. Looked like he'd at least gotten a good meal or three. He knocked on the window and moved on. He could scope out more of the space in the time it would take Grote to look up. He sped through the living room. This ranger really liked the color blue. There was a blanket and pillow on the couch. Someone had guessed recently. The reports on the escaped criminals were still hanging in the air. He paused to read through them. They certainly nailed Strode's character. I didn't know about Jakar's family. He found nothing in Grote's he didn't already know. Rough neighborhood, child of criminal family, etc. He flew down the branching hallway to find the master bedroom and bath. He slowed to look at the hollow images of the Ranger's family and looked like graduating class. Nothing very interesting back here. Beside the kitchen he found the real treasure. The door was concealed, but standing ajar, the gear room. Weapons and tools on the wall and in drawers. He didn't bother going through all of them now. The critical information to be found was that no one was home and the defenses were down. He turned and sped back toward the shuttle. Grote was looking at the window and in the process of wiping his mouth with one of his free hands. Grote was looking at the window and in the process of wiping his mouth with one of his free hands. Outside, Lomax was just reaching the door of the shuttle as he raced up to join him. Shold and Jakar were already out of their seats. Gone were the days when he could scout an entire village in the time it took a leaf to fall. Even gods grow old. He returned to normal speed as he fell into step with Lomax. She's not here, boss. Damn! That would have been convenient. What about Grote? He's in the second cell down the first hall. I let him know we're here. Fine. He informed Lomax of what else he'd seen as they walked. When they reached the cell, Grote was waiting. Hermes waved at him from the outside. Grote rolled his eyes at him. Hurry up and let me out already, old man. Open the door, fool. We're not here to play games. Yes, sir. Hermes opened the cell door and uncuffed Grote. You okay? He whispered as he freed him from the wall in the cell. I'm fine. Grote grunted back as he stretched his arms and rotated his shoulders. Just stiff, thanks. Every time. If you two are done with your little prisoner reunion, we have work to do. They joined Lomax in the hallway. He led the way to the gadget room, and Lomax spread his arms out wide. Take everything, boys. Are you sure, boss? A lot of this doesn't look like weapons. Most of it isn't, but I want no resource left behind. And there's no reason to throw potential merchandise in the garbage heap, so load it all up. Grote pulled the nearest two drawers out of their brackets, dumped one into the other, and tossed the empty one to Hermes. He pulled the gadgets off the holders on the wall and filled the drawer. Scholl got his hands on the closest blade and cut idle slices into the walls as he walked around, breaking locks and pocketing small items. Jakar kept getting distracted trying to figure out how something worked instead of just loading it up. Scholl found his way into the bedroom, and Hermes could hear glass shattering and little giggles of glee. It took less than an hour for them to empty the house and load the gear into Lomax's suborbital shuttle. Hermes, after we leave, shut this place down. He tossed him a little green metal ball just bigger than his hand. Then follow us in the Corvette. Grote, go with him. Hermes caught the ball and looked at Grote, who shrugged. They got the keys and pulled the Corvette out into the driveway. Hermes ran back into the garage, twisted the little ball twice, and threw it down the hallway. A moment later, there was a flash that encompassed the entire house. The lights went out, the hum of electricity in the walls went silent. He could see where the reports had been hanging in the air at the other end of the hall. There was nothing but darkness and silence in the house now. Hermes took one last glance at the scarred walls and scattered debris, the overturned furniture, and blinked out of the Corvette to leave it behind. Where are we going now? Asked Grote from the passenger seat. They found the facility we were working in. He looked as though the space in the Corvette wasn't quite big enough for him to be comfortable. One set of arms crossed in his lap, the other splayed along the car door and center console. We know. They wrecked the array. We have the Ranger. The girl is missing. Hermes started the engine and shifted the vehicle into gear. It was a far cry from the horses and chariots of his family's heyday on Earth, but still a simple and straightforward system. He revved the engine a couple times to get it warmed up. Scholl and Dorsch are already in New York. We'll meet them and the boss up there. Lomax wants to accelerate the project. The wheels spun against the concrete, letting out a screeching peal like a tortured horse, and the vehicle shot down the drive. Hermes whipped it around the corner into the street and increased speed down the quiet little tree-lined street. It was a 23-hour drive from there to New York City in a late subspace Earth vehicle on solid land roads. Hermes planned to be there by morning. This was a fine machine that humans had built. Good lines, powerful engine for their current level of technology. They had built roads, forged empires, advanced science, pushed their physical abilities to their limits. Well, some of them had. As a species, they had done quite well with the early guidance of his family. As a species, they had done quite well with the early guidance his family had been able to give them. Imagine where they might be if the Olympians had been allowed to stay. Sounds like things are getting moving, Grote commented as they drove. The speed didn't seem to bother him. Nothing about the situation seemed to bother him. That's good. Good, Grote? We're going to be exterminating a significant percentage of the human population. We're talking about killing, well, a lot of people. It's just business, Hermes. Collateral damage. This is way better than what I went to prison for. At least with this, it's clean and over for them in minutes. A lot cleaner for us too. Transporting living cargo is a pain. If you started an egg business, a lot of little babies don't hatch for their mothers. That's just the way the universe turns. Hermes took the exit ramp onto I-30, headed east, and doubled his speed before answering. When you told me about this job, siphoning energy from Earth, I thought you meant stealing natural resources from the planet, like coal, metals, crystals. I didn't realize you meant people. He should have, though. Even in his family's day, individuals were of minimal importance, a tool or tidbit to be sacrificed for the greater purpose, even if that greater purpose had at times been his family's entertainment. You want out? You want to be back in that prison? Of course not. I'm just not sure how I feel about it all. Look, you had my back several times in prison, and you're a nice guy, so hear me out. Nice guys don't really belong in this business. Unfortunately for you, there's only two ways out: through or slew. You either get to the other end of the job and walk away, or you try to run in the middle and don't walk away at all. I know you're fast, but you try to run on Lomax and you'll just die tired. Hermes drove in silence while he thought that over. Listen, Hermes, you're an honest guy and I appreciate you talking to me. You don't tell anyone else any of this. Lomax would dump you in an energy collection chamber without a second thought if he suspected you were any kind of risk. And I don't even think about what that maniac Shold is capable of. I brought you on because I knew I could trust you. And because you deserve another chance. You wasted most of your life in that prison, for God's sake. Hermes smiled Hermes smiled softly at the implied joke. So, don't make any of this noise at anyone else on the crew. If you think you can't handle the job, let me know and I'll see if I can find you a way out. Until then, keep your mouth shut and take care of business. Agreed? Hermes wove around the slow Hermes wove around the slow vehicular obstacle in the road. Agreed, Groat. Thank you again. Don't mention it. Seriously. Groat shifted in his seat and leaned his head against the window to take a nap. Hermes tried to focus on the road ahead. He knew where they were going, but was that where he wanted to go? Thassodar sat up. He took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. Enough self-pity. I'm a ranger. I have to get out of here. I have to stop Lomax. I have to save the humans. He looked around the sparse room. 4 walls, a floor, a door with a little window, and a food unit. Beside the door was an access panel, which was, of course, locked from the outside. The bed he was sitting on could be pushed into the wall, just as the chair Lomax had used, and even a small table could be pulled out. This was a utility room on Lomax's spacecraft. They were common features in ship architecture. A room that could be used as sleeping quarters, a small office, workroom, storage space, or, apparently, a prison cell. He called on his ranger training. Step 1. Don't assume the obvious. He stood up and crossed to the door panel. The view through the small porthole was just an empty hallway. But in this situation, empty was a good thing. People forget to lock doors all the time, he assured himself. He placed his palm to the locked panel, hoping against common sense that it would be this easy. The panel under his hand flashed red and a short buzz sounded. The door didn't move. Thassodar was undaunted. That's okay. We knew it wouldn't be that easy. He took another look around the room. It would be difficult to miss something in the small chamber, but it was always worth checking. The door panel still seemed to be his best shot, but he would need some tools. In fact, when I do get out of here, I'm going to need a weapon. He moved to the food dispenser. Particularly on a spacecraft and in a utility room that might sometimes be an office or a workroom, these models could be programmed to generate much more than just food. Would it give him the tools he needed? Just how smart were his captors? Well, he answered himself, Shold's IQ is off the charts. Jakar is a brilliant, innovative engineer. Hermes has a few thousand years of experience on me. And Lomax fooled me into thinking he was my best friend for years. But hey, anyone can overlook something. He tried for a battery-powered pneumatic drill. The machine beeped in negation. Well, so much for the drill. How about a screwdriver? The machine chimed positively, and a moment later produced an orange drink in a short glass with ice. He sighed. I get it. Food only. Actually, he could use a drink at this point. He downed the beverage and considered this limitation. He wasn't beaten yet. If he could get to the interior of the locked panel, he might be able to trigger the door. He ordered a steak and baked potato with utensils. The unit gave a positive beep and a few moments later delivered a plate with a well-done steak and a steamed baked potato. The exciting part, though, was the knife and fork that came with it. He pulled the table out of the wall, set the plate on it, and returned to the locked panel, armed with his improvised tools. The knife wasn't sharp, but it was at least narrow, and the tines of the fork even more so. So he fit the tip in the edge of the panel and shoved. It only took a few curses and a small bruise on his palm to get the knife wedged between the panel and the proper wall. A moment later, the panel popped away, dangling by wires from the new hole in the wall. Thassodar chewed on one end of the stake and looked over the wires. He wasn't an engineer like Jakar, but every ranger got some basic exposure to such things. Repairs had to sometimes be done far from the nearest port. However, having a user manual nearby would have been extremely helpful. There were 3 thick wires attached to the panel: a braided red, white, and yellow that split as it got close to the panel, a black and white banded wire, and a green and purple swirled wire that both went into the wall. The braided set would be the power to the panel. He could disconnect those, but that would just turn the panel off, and likely leave the door locked. Or it might unlock it, but he wasn't quite ready to take that gamble. One of the other wires would be the door lock control. Which one? That was the one he needed to manipulate. He chose the black and white wire. If he was wrong, he could try the green and purple swirl next. He carefully unscrewed the red and yellow wires from the panel, leaving the white in place. He bent them around to connect to the black and white terminal. The moment they touched, the floor electrified. Thassodar screamed out and jumped from one foot to the other, each one taking a nasty shock as it touched the floor again. He jumped on the table, safe from the floor. Sparks were arcing at the black and white terminal. He had to disconnect those wires without touching the floor. He picked up the baked potato and threw it. It hit, knocked the wires loose from the terminal, and spread potato all over the inside of the panel. More sparks arced momentarily across the baked potato, and then panel went dark. The sizzled smell of burnt potato filled the room. A glob of potato stuffing dripped onto the floor without even a hint of sizzle. Thassodar cautiously put a foot down from the table. The floor was cold. It took only a moment cleaning and inspection to see that the potato had fried the panel. With a despairing sigh, he checked the door, but it was still locked. He tossed the butter knife onto the table and collapsed on his bed with his eyes closed. It was probably a good thing that his career was over, he thought. He hadn't exactly turned out to be much of a ranger. Bjormi would probably have smashed right through this door with his horned head, or better, smashed Lomax despite the electrified floor, or not been fooled by Lomax in the first place. Thassodar had been so busy sampling the Earth culture and enjoying the connection of the clubs and nightlife, seeking energy exchange with locals to make his life feel less empty, that he hadn't even noticed a criminal plot unfolding right across the dinner table from him. When the Rangers did show up to collect Groat, all they'd find was half the human population than there should be, and Thassodar sitting barefoot in a locked room. He wondered how long it would take. He wondered if the dispenser would give him a deck of cards or maybe a marker so he could write on the walls like some hopeless madman. Then it hit him. Lomax couldn't keep him in this room. This was Lomax's ship, his smuggler ship. Thassodar realized belatedly. I couldn't just real I couldn't just release him back into this planet like a tagged species sample. Thassodar opened his eyes slowly as he put his facts together. Lomax was going to kill him. He can try, he growled with renewed determination. There had to be another way out of this room. He blinked as he stared up at the ceiling and realized there was something directly above him. Instead of smooth ceiling, it was an hexagonal grid. It was a meter long and perhaps half a meter wide. Using Earth measurements, the ventilation conduits. He'd seen those used for escapes many times on Earth's entertainment. He had a new plan. He pulled one of the chairs from the wall. He saw duplicate markings on the next panel section, so there were at least 2 chairs available. The chair stacked onto the bed got him close enough to reach the panel with the butter knife. 8 screws held it in place, one in each corner, and 4 more at the midpoint of the sides. As he fit the tip of the blade into the head of the screw and twisted, he cursed the stupid machine for not giving him a real screwdriver. The screws did not release easily. His arm ached, and he had sweat in his eyes by the time the third one was out. He rolled his shoulders and started in on the fourth screw. He would go through the ventilation conduit until he found another vent panel. He could likely kick that out from the inside. The ship's artificial gravity would work in his favor then. Unlike now, he grumbled, twisting the knife at the stuck screw over his head. He would make his way to the command center. The actual ship's controls might be locked out, but communications usually had an emergency bypass setting built in. If he could just contact someone nearby, he could at least get back to Earth. That was the first objective. He continued to make and revise plans and tactics as he worked at the screws. He was going to survive. He was going to get out of this. He was going to be a hero. The last screw didn't wait for him to unscrew it. It pulled free of the ceiling and dropped the vent grid right on top of him. The weight of it knocked him out. knocked him off the chair, and half of him crashed onto the bed. The other half, his head with it, hit the floor. The reverberation caused the last glob of potato to fall from the inert lock panel. Thassodar groaned. He was going to have a headache, but at least the vent shaft was open. Success! He replaced the chair onto the bed and climbed back up, reaching into the conduit. It went straight up another meter. The sides were smooth and straight, unclimbable. If he had another person here, they could stand on his shoulders and climb out, but there was no point in continuing that thought. If the dispenser wasn't going to give him a drill, it certainly wasn't going to give him a partner. He went back to the wall and pulled the second chair out and to the bed. He balanced it precariously on the first chair. Good thing they were just simple blocks. The second chair gave him almost enough height. His fingertips were just barely curled over the edge of the vertical conduit shaft. A quick jump and he was able to get his elbows over the edge to pull himself up. Unfortunately, the same jump caused his block tower to tumble. But if this worked, it wouldn't matter. He pulled his head on into the horizontal conduit. It was dark. Naturally. Why would anyone light a ventilation conduit? He closed his eyes and promised himself that if he ever got a ship, he would light the ventilation conduits just in case. He opened his eyes. He opened his eyes again. The difference in light for his eyes was just enough for him to make out the interior of the conduit. A meter in front of him was a gigantic fan. It wasn't moving at the moment, but there was a grate in front of it, so he couldn't pass, even if he could be guaranteed that it wouldn't start. He shifted his arms around the opening and turned to look behind him. Another grated wall. This one seemed to be a filter of some kind. Either way, a dead end. He dropped back down to the bed, this time managing to land on his feet. He again threw his career and life into the emotional trash can, and then kicked himself for being so self-centered. He was one life, but Lomax and his crew was on their way to ending hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of human lives on Earth. He was supposed to be their protector, and he had failed them. Husbands, wives, children, whole families were about to be decimated because he hadn't seen what was right in front of him. He thought he could put a whole planet on his shoulders and keep it safe, and he just couldn't. He couldn't see everything, couldn't be everywhere at once, even if he hadn't been fooled by Lomax. He'd been so sure that Grote was the true enemy. Turns out he was just a middle manager. Thassodar's head throbbed, his arms were sore, his heart and his pride ached. He shoved the remaining chair block off the bed and laid down. The lights dimmed automatically, and before he knew it, he was asleep. His dreams were tortures, visions of humans being processed into energy in Shoal's invention, Lomax laughing and eating. Grote shoved a man and a woman into a chamber, their little boy crying on the outside while Jakar held him back. The faces in the chamber changed, their skin turned blue, cobalt blue. They were his own parents, and he was crying. And he was the crying, terrified child. Hermes raced by and his parents were gone. He was an adult again. Grout was putting someone else in the chamber, a little wrinkled grandmother who begged him in Spanish to help her. He woke to the sound of screaming and recognized his own voice echoing back at him. There has to be another way out of here. He started at the door and examined every foot of the wall bit by bit. There had to be something he had missed, something he could use. He checked the space where the chair blocks had pulled from the wall, but they were empty, only the marking for the chair above them. Same with the table. The bed wouldn't pull any further away from the wall, and he pushed it into the wall just to check, but it was only the word for bed. On the third wall, though, he found a new marking, a marking that read maintenance. Excited, he opened that section of the wall, using the fork instead of the slender key that would normally be used by the ship's engineers. The panel came away, and he knelt to look inside. There was machinery for the dispenser and an access port for the climate controls, and between them, dim light from a back access passage. He'd found what he needed. He thrust himself toward it and snagged against the machinery. He twisted, he lay on the ground and shoved himself forward on his stomach. Eventually, he sat back on the floor and glared at the tempting opening that was too small for him to get through. If Valentina were here, she could get through that, he whispered. And that is the end of chapter 17. A few notes that I have. I apologize for the fumbling on the words. The way it's spaced and put together kind of threw me off on certain things. There is a part where they're destroying Thassodar's house, where it talks about Lomax and Hermes and Grote and Jakar and the other characters kind of trashing the house. But immediately when Hermes and Grote are leaving in the Corvette, it says that the other two characters, minus Lomax, are in New York. That doesn't track in this part of the story just because they were here and now they're here. It's there has to be a consistency there. That's the only thing that kind of threw me off on that part. Um, didn't quite make a whole heck of a lot of sense. There's also uh, a section where Thassodar is explaining his thought process on how smart the other aliens are. I could have done without that. It really didn't bring any additional details to the story. Also, the ventilation scenario where he's unscrewing it and crawling up to see that there was no hope either which way. Again, did not need to be part of anything, didn't add or detract from any of the story, and was just, I think, at this point, filler. But there's the engineer in me is also kind of going to be a little nitpicky on this, on the access, on the lock panel, on the access panel. You have your power going in, which is fine. However, it's set up, and then you have two wires that are primarily for data. The alien spacecraft, and this is again me being an engineer, this doesn't add or detract anything for it, but the alien spacecraft, being of such high caliber and such high end material and all this programming and kind of beyond um, the thought of human processes, wouldn't have a simple single wire circuit controlling two facets of the system that could be manipulated using a voltage signal. What I mean is by just grounding it or adding power to it, it really wouldn't affect the function of the unit because those cables are primarily data, so zeros and ones that are going through that are probably feeding data into some kind of computing system. It's kind of the same way if you see like a USB port, you have your ground, your power, and then you have your data lines. And that's actually sending information, not just um, a, a switch. I don't know if that makes any sense. So, unless they oversimplified this panel, it doesn't quite make sense as to why it would have. If Thassodar is really that green to this panel and this technology and whatever is happening, his frustration, could just be beating it, messing with some wires or doing something and then electrifying the floor. Not necessarily, hey, I'm going to click these together and it'll do it. So, again, engineer brain acting a little crazy, doesn't make sense, I know. But regardless of that, if you have a story you're just waiting to be read, I want to read it. Send me those unpublished, self-published works to the email address in the description below, and you might be featured in an upcoming episode of I'll Read That. Let's build this community where writers support writers, and everybody's story has the opportunity of being heard. Don't forget, like, subscribe, and drop those thoughts, those critiques, those loves, those hates in the comments because your feedback could help another writer grow. So, as always, keep writing, and I'll read that.
I'll read that, a story to be told.